Okay, well, today we're going to look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. A lot of times we sing about his death and dying on the cross and his blood, and just look in the back of a hymnal, you'll see lots more hymns about his death and about his blood and his power in the blood and what can wash away my sins. Some of the ones we sung this morning, and we see very few songs about his resurrection. It's almost like a very little talked about doctrine in the church, a very almost forgotten doctrine in the church. But if he died but he didn't rise, we're still, according to 1 Corinthians 15, we're still pitiful, we're still in our sins, we have no hope. But it's because he lives that I can face tomorrow. It's because he lives that I know that I'm going to live, that death is not the end for me, that the grave has lost its sting, and that I'm going to live with him again forever. And so really I think we see lots of Christians wearing crosses around their necks. Maybe you should start wearing these things that have like little rocks that roll away, and there's a tomb there. Yeah, a little rock rolling away. Run. Yeah, so not literal rocks and literal tombs, of course, but I'm just talking like a little gold thing that has a little, and it rolls away, it can roll back. That's actually a better picture of what the Christian life is like, because he died, but he rose again. And part of being baptized is symbolic of the conversion. Is you don't stay underwater, do you? You come back up. That's the newness of life you walk in. And so we're going to talk about the resurrection this morning. And it's for skeptics and for those who are critical of the Bible, this is one of the areas I like to attack more than anything else, because there's lots of different things, and it's really, you have to piece the puzzle together when it comes to this. So you're going to really need to have your thinking caps on this morning, really need to be thinking these things through, because we're going to go back and forth to each gospel and even to 1 Corinthians as well, to see how these things happen, the chronology of the events. So first, let's read Matthew 28, 1 through 10. Okay. And actually, before we even go there, let's just do a little review of last week. What do you remember from last week? What sticks out in your mind from last week? And of course, anyone can get involved in this. Children, ladies, you can all vocalize whatever you believe you learned from last week as a review. And what does that prove, though? It proves that they were what when Jesus was speaking? Yeah, they were listening. Yeah, they were listening to what he was saying, and they even understood it, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have put the guards there in the first place. What else? Okay. Because of what? How did they know that? How would they know that? Well, because they saw his undergarments that he had on. Do you remember when they would have seen that? Well, when he washed their feet at the Last Supper. There you go. There you go. And then people who saw him when he was crucified, right? They would have known it too. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
When Jesus is fired, we should be quiet.
Okay. All right. I don't know if that was from last week, but that's true. Yeah.
Pilate, he wasn't being a good governor. Whenever he offered up someone who is a known guilty of sedition and murder, and someone who was accused of sedition and murder, but he knew had no fault in him, to offer up that choice was he was just being unjust in his governorship. He was just trying to please the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Brother Sean?
I think this was part of that week. No, I think it was now. No, I don't think that's part of that week, sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, let's...
Nicodemus and Joseph, was it?
Mhm.
Disciples of Christ, and they didn't care how people felt after his death.
Right. Right.
Joseph having the courage to go to Pilate and ask him if Christ died.
Mhm.
That was he a Sanhedrin?
He was part of the council, yep. Yep. Yep, that's good. Now, what can you tell me what prophecies we talked about last week that are fulfilled in the scriptures we talked about last week? What about his burial, where he was buried? How was that fulfilled? Well, yeah, new tomb, but there was another adjective used with tomb, that rich man's tomb. Right. He died with the criminals, but he was buried in a rich man's tomb, scriptures say. Was that fulfilled prophecy? Those things happening. What else? What about the location of the tomb? Do you remember about that? Right near a garden, right? And how was that helpful? And why was that important? Okay. Yeah, that's one reason it was important. They had to get done before the Passover started. And when did the Passover start? About 6 p.m. Right. And so Jesus died at what time? 3 p.m. And so they had 3 hours to go ask Pilate for him to confirm that he was dead, then to get him off the cross, and to put him in the tomb. It's not much time.
Gotta wrap the body and put all the
Right.
herbs and all that stuff on it too. So
Right. And how many pounds are there? You remember that?
100 pounds.
Yeah, see? Yeah, so all these things had to fall into place. They had to have something that was nearby because he wouldn't have much time to get them anywhere else. So it's very important of these things. All right, anything else you remember from last week? What is the day of preparation? What day is that? Sean?
The day before the Sabbath, so you gather 2 days worth of food, or before the Sabbath, so you can eat through it.
Yeah, that's why it was called day of preparation, because it was the day before Sabbath. Sabbath, you wouldn't gather any food at all. You wouldn't even cook it on the Sabbath. So it'd be Friday on our calendar. It'd be Friday as the Sabbath is Saturday on our calendar. And when we talked about the 3 days last week, that Jesus was in the tomb or in the grave for 3 days. Does that mean 3 24-hour periods? It means what?
Then he could have been in the grave for 1 hour that one day, then next morning would be considered the day, then that night would be considered the third day.
Yeah, so the days go basically from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Okay, so any part of any day would count. Sorry, 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. Any part of any day would count as one day. Okay, so we're using Jewish reckoning here, not American English reckoning, but Jewish reckoning when it comes to counting the days. So if we get these things right, we won't get a wrong day like he was buried on Thursday or he was buried on Wednesday. We won't get a wrong day when it comes to these things. We'll get the right days and realize what they mean by 3 days. Okay, anything else anyone remembers before we move on? Oh, okay, go ahead.
The prophecies were fulfilled that Hunting Nelly's bones were broken.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So what did that mean, Malachi, when they came to him, when they were going to break his bones? What did they find out?
That he was already dead.
That's right. Very good. Very good. Okay. Let's go to Matthew 28, and we'll start in verse 1, and we'll read through verse 10. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "Rejoice." So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, that there they will see me." Okay, let's stop there in Matthew. Let's go to Mark. And we're going to read all these accounts first, and then I'm going to start to give you a chronology of events as I see it unfolding here. Okay, Mark 16, 1 through 14. So hopefully you have your thinking caps on. You're thinking about the details, things that are, added details given here in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. and new things we're seeing here, so we can piece that together. Okay, Mark 16, 1 through 14. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. They said among themselves, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where he laid him? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you." So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. After that he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they walked and went to the country. And they went and told it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. Later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. Okay, go to Luke 24. Are you catching new details along the way? Good. Luke 24, and I'll read verses 1 through 12. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. But they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. Then they went in and did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. It happened, as they were greatly perplexed about this, that behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments. Then as they were afraid, they bowed their faces to the earth. They said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying, 'The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the 3rd day rise again.' And they remembered his words. Then they returned from the tomb and told all these things to the 11 and all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and other women with them, who told these things to the apostles. And the words seemed to them like idle tales, and did not believe them. But Peter arose and ran to the tomb, and stooping down, he saw the linen cloths lying by themselves, and he departed, marveling to himself at what had happened." Okay, finally go to John chapter 20. And we're going to start in verse 1, and we'll read through verse 11 to start out with here. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. And the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. The disciples went away again to their own homes. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. Okay, stop there. Let's go back to Matthew. All right, so let's talk about the chronology here. And we'll get back into all these passages again, just to kind of look at details here. Okay, first thing happens is in Mark 16:1, it says, "Now when the Sabbath was past," and when does the Sabbath pass? When does the day end and a new day start again? 6 p.m. So when the Sabbath had passed, so this is right after the Sabbath passed, probably right about 6 p.m., a little bit after that, it says in Mark 16:1, Mary Magdalene, Mary of James, the mother of is not there. So it could be Mary of James, her husband, or of James, her son. Okay, but usually, I don't think it usually says of a son. So it's probably her husband there. But the mother of is added there into the, it's not found in the Greek. So we see Mary Magdalene, Mary of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. So the first thing happens after the Sabbath ends is these three women, at least, there might be others with them that aren't named. We see that oftentimes in scriptures. These three at least went and bought the spices that they might anoint him. Okay? Next thing we see in verse 2 of Mark 16, it says, very early in the morning, on the first day of the week. Okay? Matthew 28:1 says it differently. It says, as the day began to dawn. So it's very similar language there. And Luke 24:1 says very early in the morning as well. Okay? John 20 in verse 1 says, and this only mentions Mary Magdalene, says, while it was still dark. Okay? So you see all these things coming together. While it was still dark, as it's about to dawn, so the sun's basically coming up. Okay? But it's still dark out. Now, who was going to this tomb? Who do we know went to this tomb?
We got Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene, okay. Joanna, okay.
Mary, the mother of James.
Mary of James, yep. And
Salome.
Salome. And we know from Luke 24:10, it says there were other women as well. And so we don't know all the women who went there, but we do know. And when it comes to these passages that have different details, do we take the one with the least detail, or do we combine all details together to get a full picture? Right. So what we see in Matthew 28:1, it mentions Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, who's of James. That's the only two it mentions. Mark 16:1 mentions those two plus Salome. Luke 24:10 mentions Mary Magdalene, the other Mary. It does not mention Salome, but it mentions Joanna, and then it says other women, plural. So obviously Salome would be included in other women, but there's other people besides Salome because it's plural, other women. Okay? So these all went to the tomb at the same time. But, and John 20 only mentions Mary Magdalene, doesn't mention any of the rest of them. Only mentions her because the focus is on her when it comes to the story it's telling in John 20. Okay, so what we've seen so far is the women went and bought spices, and then they began to go to the tomb early in the morning while the sun was still rising, was beginning to dawn. We see who was there. The next detail we see found in Matthew 28 and verse 2. And this is the only one that gives this detail. It says a great earthquake. Behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. So there was a great earthquake. Now, how far and wide this earthquake was felt, I have no idea. But I do know that when the woman got there, we'll look at this here in a second, they were surprised that the tomb had rolled away. And whether there was an earthquake and they didn't relate it back to the tomb, the stone being rolled away, I have no idea. But they were surprised when they got there because they were thinking to themselves on the way there, who's going to roll back the stone for us? Okay, so they didn't know it was going to be that way when they got there. And not only that, they didn't know that the Pharisees had gone to Pilate and asked them to seal it and put a guard there. They had no idea about that at this point. Okay, so when they arrived and it was rolled away, they might not even have understood the significance of it being rolled because it was sealed, and the fact they probably weren't expecting to see guards there. But the guards we see in verse 4, they shook for fear of him and became like dead men. Now, what does that mean? We talked about this a little bit last week. I don't know exactly what that means. Eventually, they ran back. We see later on in Matthew 28. When they did, I don't know. Maybe became like dead men means they fainted. I don't know. Okay? The scripture doesn't say. But they weren't afraid when they saw the Zealot soldiers, these women. You see right here in verse 5. And now at this point, at the beginning, we see the angel sat on top of the stone he rolled away. But we do know that in verse 5, when he's talking to the ladies, where is the angel at this point in time? Is he still outside on top of the stone? No, he's inside talking to them, right? And he's inside talking to them when? After they've already gone in there and they've seen what has happened, right? They've seen that Jesus isn't there. Okay, so we see a great earthquake, and the stone was rolled away while they're on their way there. Mark 16:3 talks about this. It says in Mark 16:3, talking about the ladies here, it says, and they said among themselves, who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us? But when they looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. Okay? So they saw it had been rolled away, and then they entered the tomb. We see that in Mark 16 and verse 5. It says, "And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed." And this, once again, brings us back to Matthew 28, where they were scared. It says in Matthew 28 and verse 5, "And the angel answered and said to the woman, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified.'" So Matthew skips over the part that the other details give, or Mark gives and Luke gives, that they went inside first and saw that the body was not there before he spoke to him. It doesn't give the detail that he's actually inside the tomb when he says these things, but the other scriptures do. And so you see that in Mark. You also see that in Luke 24. Going back to that. It says in Luke 24, in verse 2, it says, "But they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, and then they went in and did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened, as they were greatly perplexed about this, that behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments." So how many angels were there altogether? 2, right? At least 2. Well, I guess there could have been more than 2, but Luke he tells us 2, right? Matthew only mentions 1. Mark only mentions 1, and Mark mentions the one. What does he say about the one he mentions? That he looked like what? A young man. He looked like a young man. And so at least one of the angels, probably both of them, looked like young men. But the one who spoke to them in Mark looked like a young man himself. And so we see that there was an account here. They were perplexed about this. Then they were fearful. And in verse 5 it says, "Then as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth, they said to them, 'Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again.'" They remembered his words. So they heard Jesus mention these things several times. We'll get back to that here in a second. So they get to the tomb. They see the stone is rolled away. They go inside. They see that Jesus' body is not there. They're perplexed about it. Then they see the 2 angels. And one of them talks to him first as a young man, and then they both begin to talk to him, and they say these things that are found in Luke's gospel here. John doesn't mention any of this stuff. All John mentioned is Mary Magdalene. He's only focusing on her. He's not focused on any other woman, and we'll get to that here in a minute. Only focusing on Mary Magdalene. She goes into the tomb, and then she runs out and goes back and gets Simon, Peter, and John. It's all it mentions about her. It doesn't mention anything about angels or about any other woman. Okay? All right, so we see that happening, and then they're told to go back and tell the disciples, these women who are there, they're told to go back and tell the disciples the things which they heard from the angels, that Jesus has risen from the dead, and that he's going to meet them in Galilee. Okay, that's what they're to go back and tell him. All right, and then we see in Luke 24, 5-8, which you just read, this idea of being risen from the dead. Now, they heard this many times from Jesus, okay? I'll give you some scripture references here if you want to take them down. They heard this from Jesus in Luke 9:22. Now, I don't know which instances that these women were there here, and they heard it from him before, because it says, and they remembered his words. And to remember something, you must have heard it before, right? And so they heard it from Jesus before, but we see Jesus talking to his disciples, and these women were at least in the midst of the disciples at some point in time. Luke 9:22 talks about this. Luke 18 and verse 33, can't read my own handwriting, talks about it. Matthew 12:40. Matthew 16 and verse 21. You see it in Matthew 17 and verse 23. Matthew 20 and verse 19. And let's just look at a couple of these in Mark 8. Mark 8:31. After Peter confesses Jesus is the Christ, we see in verse 31, and Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he turned around and looked at the disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you're not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men." I think part of the reason, as I read through some of these passages I'm giving you here, where he mentioned these things, is that when they hear Jesus talk about this, he's always mentioning it along with his death, and they get kind of excited and upset about this, and I don't think they hear the resurrection part. I think they just hear, maybe they heard it but didn't take it in. They hear the death part, and they want to rebuke him because you're not supposed to die, you're the Messiah. So they think to themselves, okay? Go to Mark 9, and we'll read verses 9 through 13. It says, it's after the Mount of Transfiguration. Now as they came down from the mountain, he commanded them, talking about James, John, and Peter, that they should tell no one the things that they had seen till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So he's mentioning it right there. Till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept this word to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead meant. So there's a lack of understanding here. And they asked him, saying, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Then he answered and told them, "Indeed, Elijah is coming first and restores all things. And how is it written concerning the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you, Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wish, as it is written of him." Talking about John the Baptist, of course, who came in the spirit and power of Elijah. And then in verse 30 of Mark 9, he says, "Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it. For he taught his disciples and said to them, The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and after he is killed, he will rise the third day. But they did not understand this saying, and were afraid to ask him." So there's a lack of understanding on their part concerning these things. And we see it, by the way, we'll see as we look at this later on, how they respond when people come back and tell them, "He's not there, he's not there, he's not there." How they respond to that, they just didn't understand what really was supposed to happen. And the fact that the women went to the tomb on Sunday morning to anoint him with more oil, to put more spices in there, that tells you they didn't think he was going to rise on the third day either. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going there. They expect him to be gone. They wouldn't expect a dead body to be there, right? And so you see these women, they're remembering these things, and I'm not even sure they're completely understanding these things, but they are remembering these things. Okay? Then let's go to John chapter 20 for a second here. And let's focus on Mary Magdalene just for a minute here. Okay? There's a reason, there's a focus there, I believe. John 20, and let's read verse 1 and 2. "Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Okay, so the disciple whom Jesus loved, by the way, is John, the one who's writing this book. So you know that, okay? And you'll if you want to know why I think that, you can read the last verse of the Gospel according to John. I'll tell you why. So what I think happened with Mary Magdalene, she went to the tomb with the other ladies, first thing in the morning, as the beginning of dawn. They went there with the spices, preparing to anoint his body. They saw the stone rolled away. They went into the tomb. And at this point, here's where the question arises. We don't have the details of what happened at this point, the chronology of it. I think you have two options. One, either she didn't see and hear the angels. She left the tomb. As soon as she saw that Jesus' body was not there, she was kind of frantic and left the tomb right away before the angel appeared before them. Or she was there when the angel appeared before them, and she got so afraid of that, she left before they said anything. Or maybe a third option could possibly be that she heard and saw the angels, didn't take it in, didn't understand, and just ran away. Okay? Those are the kind of the three options I think you have there. But she went back before the other ladies went back. Okay? She went back before them. And as she went back, she went and told Simon Peter. And listen to what she said here in verse 2. This is why it has to be one of those three options, in my opinion. Because she said, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we did not know where they have laid him." Now, if she heard the angels and actually understood what they were saying to her, would she have said this statement? No, she wouldn't have. So I think it's one of those three options. Either she went into the tomb, like the other woman did, didn't see the angel yet, they saw the body was gone, there's perplexion, she just ran away. I think that's probably the most likely one. She ran away right then. Or she stood there, she saw the angels, she got frightened, she ran away then. Or she stood there, she got frightened with the rest of them, heard what they had to say, and then didn't pay attention, didn't hear it. Sometimes when you're frantic about something, you're upset about something, you don't really take things in, you know? And so that's a third option as well. But I'm kind of leaning towards the first one personally. Okay, so she ran back, and as she's running back to the tomb, I think the ladies are getting the full message from the angels. They had bowed themselves down to the ground, as we've read already. They get the full message from the angels, and they start to walk back as well. But she ran back, okay? She got Peter and John, and we see, let's begin to read again in John chapter 20. It says, John chapter 20, verse 3, Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. Is John trying to rub it in his face here, or what? John, he says it several times here that he made it to the tomb before Peter did. Obviously, John was a better runner, better in shape, maybe younger than he was, okay? He outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. So John, he stopped there at the beginning of the tomb and looked in, but didn't go in. So he's a faster guy, maybe a little more bashful, a little more shy. Peter, he just runs right in there, as we see here in a second. And Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there. And the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together and in place by itself. Now, if Jesus' body had been stolen, do you think the thieves are going to unwrap the body before they steal it? It's a dead body. They're going to steal it with the stuff on the body, right? And are they going to neatly fold the handkerchief and put it in a different place? No, and so it shows you that it wasn't someone from the outside taking the body. It was someone from the inside of this wrapping, escaping the wrapping, and being put nicely in its place like it should be, okay? So Christ rose from the grave. That's what we're seeing here. That they didn't understand it at first. It says, and the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. He believed he was gone. For as yet they did not know. Now the word for know there is a Greek word oida. It means to intellectually know. Okay. It also could be translated as understand or recall. Okay. So at this point in time, they didn't know, they didn't understand, they didn't recall, because I gave you several verses of Scripture where Jesus talked about these things very clearly. You can look them up yourself. Very clearly talked to these things about them. So it's just that they didn't understand these things, or they didn't remember these things, kind of like the women didn't. Okay. And then in verse 10, then the disciples went away again to their own homes. Now the word homes is not in the Greek here, okay? All it says is they went to their own. That's what the Greek word says there. They went to their own. So they're assuming it's homes here. The word for homes is not there. I don't know why they don't have homes in italics in the Bible. The word for homes is not there. And so I think they actually went back to their own, meaning their own disciples, their brothers in Christ, because their home was far away. We're talking about all the way back in Galilee, out by the Sea of Galilee, which is north and east of where Jerusalem is. And so seriously they went back to their own homes. Okay, that's where they're from. They're from Galilee. I think they actually went back to their own, talking about their own people, the people they're with, their true brothers and sisters, those who obey God's commandments. And let's read on with Mary here and see what happened with her. We see that, actually, before we get to that point here, let's see here. The other women. Now, this is the point where, as Mary is running back to the tomb with, we've talked about this already, with Simon and John, the other ladies get the whole message to the point of understanding it and remembering it, and they leave. And now we see this point where Mary has an encounter with Jesus. She's the first one to see Jesus risen from the dead. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and do not know where they have laid him. Now, they could have responded to this, what she said, but obviously they looked beyond her and saw someone standing behind her, and so they didn't have to answer it. It says in verse 14, Now when she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? She, supposing him to be the gardener, because who else would be out there that early in the morning, right? Said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him, Rabboni, which is to say teacher. It also means master as well. Jesus said to her, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. And then Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. And so she has the first encounter with Jesus, and obviously the other ladies are already on their way back to meet the other disciples, and Peter and John are already on their way back. And Luke 24:12 talks about Peter as well. Only mentions Peter. Does not mention John or Mary Magdalene, but only mentions Peter. So they're on their way back. He appears to Mary, and when she went back, according to Mark 16:9 through 11, when she finally got back and told them the things, it says, Mark 16:9, and when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. And so even though she had claimed to see him rise from the dead, they did not believe her. Okay, and then after, since she's the first one, according to Mark 9, she's the first one that Jesus appeared to, we know that the other woman he appeared to was next. Okay? Let's go to Matthew 28 and read 9 through 11. It's all making sense so far? Everyone's getting it? Okay. So just to go over it again, we see the ladies come to the tomb. It's opened up. They go inside. They see Jesus' body's gone. I think Mary Magdalene runs away at this point. Then the angels appear to them. They give them a message. They're afraid. They bow down to the ground. At this point, Mary's running back. She's getting James and Peter and John. They're running back. Then the ladies get the message. They start to walk back. They run back. Peter and John go in. Don't see Jesus' body there. Mary goes in. She's weeping. She sees Jesus. She starts to walk back. Okay, but as she's starting to walk back, the other ladies are still walking back. So is Peter and John. And I think that's where we are right here in verse 9 of Matthew 28. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them. This is talking about the ladies now. Okay, Jesus met them, saying, rejoice. So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. Okay. Now if we go to Mark 16, again, Mark 16:8, they actually arrive. They arrive back there. Mark 16:8, we see that on the way back, after they have seen Jesus, or before they have seen, I believe this is before they saw Jesus, they were afraid after they saw the angel. So Mark 16:8 says about these ladies, minus Mary Magdalene, they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And I believe this is the reason why Jesus may have appeared to them on their way back, because they got afraid. They were amazed about seeing the angels and not seeing Jesus' body there, and maybe they were afraid to tell the disciples, and maybe that's why Jesus appeared to them. Now, this is subjection on my part, conjecture. I'm just, that's how I'm kind of reasoning out why he would have appeared to them. He probably had other reasons too, but I think they were afraid on the way back, and so he appeared to them to give them more confidence, tell them not to be afraid, and go tell them where to meet him. Okay, so Luke 24 and verse 11. We see now when these women appeared back, it says in verse 11, their words seemed to them like idle tales. They did not believe them, so they didn't believe these women either. Okay? And in Luke 24 and verse, let's see. And then Luke 24 and verse 24, now Jesus is talking to the two disciples on the way to Emmaus. He's talking to the two disciples on the way to Emmaus, and as they're recounting back to Jesus the things that they heard before they left on their 7-mile journey to Emmaus, they say in Luke 24:24, and certain of those who are with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. That's referring to Peter and John. So Peter and John had come back before these two disciples left the meeting place for Emmaus. So they had returned as well. Okay, so after we see the appearance, he appears to Mary Magdalene, appears to the other women. Both those groups get back. Peter and John are back as well. They've all explained these things to everyone. So now two groups have seen Jesus. Mary Magdalene saw Jesus rise from the dead, and then the other woman on the way back saw Jesus rise from the dead as well. And they're all announcing these things to the other disciples, and some of them believed, some of them didn't believe, and some of them were bewildered about what had happened. Obviously, these two disciples on the way to Emmaus were bewildered. Now we're to the point where they're leaving the place where they're meeting for Emmaus. Luke chapter 24 and verse 13. Now behold, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now I think we talked about this last week. 7 miles, walking at a 25-minute to 30-minute per mile pace, it would take about 3 to 3.5 hours to walk 7 miles. Okay, when us men have walked early in the morning, we'd walk 3 miles, and we'd walk in a pretty brisk pace, and it'd take about an hour. So that's about a 20-minute mile. So I figure a 25 to 30-minute mile is about a proper time limit there. But 3 to 3.5 hours to walk from where they were in Jerusalem to Emmaus. And they talked together of all the things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near. This is going to be the third appearance of Jesus to someone. That Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so they did not know him. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then the one whose name was... And the fact that they're sad, what does that tell you? Did they understand what had happened yet? And if Jesus had risen from the dead, they wouldn't be sad, right? He's alive. They'd be praising God about it. And so they still weren't understanding these things, so they were sad. Then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happened there in these days?" He said to them, "What things?" So they said to him, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our own rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things had happened. Yes, and certain women from our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they did not find his body, they came saying they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. Then he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe, and all the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Well, wouldn't that be a great sermon to have on videotape or to have on audio recording? I mean, that's like a 3-hour sermon by Jesus, expounding on the prophets and the law, all the things concerning himself. That'd be wonderful to have. Guess we'll hear it someday. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone further. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. Then they said to one another, Did not our heart burn within us, while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us? So they rose up that very hour, and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11, and those who were with them gathered together. And so we see they have this, probably a 3-hour walk back, back to Emmaus. And once they get there, it says that in verse 29, the day is far spent. I mean, it's getting to the very end of the day. It's probably getting close to 6 o'clock at this point, close to the sun going down. And even though it's at that point, they've already walked 7 miles, what do? They turn around and go back the other way and go back to tell them that they now have seen him as well. And then in verse 34 it says this, saying, The Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. That's a 4th appearance of Jesus. So it must have happened that while they're on their way back, and let's say they're running back, let's say it takes them not 3 hours now, but an hour to an hour and a half. So in that time frame right there, Jesus somehow appeared to Peter by himself. Not the rest of the disciples with him, but only Peter by himself. Now, why he did that, we can probably suppose it's because he denied him 3 times. He's trying to encourage him or restore him or bring him back into the fold, or it may be. But whatever it is, he appears to Simon next while they are on their way back. Okay? And then we see in Luke 24, in verse 36, it says, this is after they had come back, they heard that he appeared to Simon Peter as well. So in verse 36, now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you. But they were terrified and frightened, supposed that they had seen a spirit. So after all these things, Mary Magdalene had touched him. The other ladies had grabbed his feet, remember? So they knew he wasn't a spirit. Peter had saw him. They didn't say he grabbed him or touched him or anything, but surely he knew at this point in time he wasn't just a spirit, but the rest of them are still having a problem with it. They're still having an issue. So you see the misunderstanding, they're not understanding this resurrection idea of the body, that they're completely risen from the dead. They're not understanding these things. And he said to them, why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold, my hands and my feet, that is, I myself, handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they were still not believed for joy and marveled, he said for him, have you any food here? So they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and ate it in their presence. So whatever the glorified body is like, because we will be like Jesus when we rise from the dead, you can still eat. You're still just like a regular person. Now Jesus, he shows them his hands and his feet and his side. He'll show Thomas later on. And it's Thomas, he said, put your hand into my side. And so the wounds are still there. And obviously there's no blood pouring out of them. So, and he says here that, spirits don't have flesh and bones. Okay? And who is spirit and must worship in spirit and truth? God. So does God have flesh and bones? No, God does not have flesh and bones. Does the Holy Spirit have flesh and bones? But are they people? Yes. So can you be a person but not have flesh and bones? Yes. And the fact that they saw Jesus and didn't believe he was a person, they believed he was a spirit, but they still believed he was a person. He was talking to him, he was talking back to them, tells me that someone can be in spirit form, not be in flesh and bone form, and they can still be a person, right? Okay. The reason I bring that up, just as kind of like a side note here, is that some people would have you, I know it's kind of going on an exit ramp here for a second, but there's people out there who maybe are doubting the existence of the soul or the spirit after the grave, that their soul sleep, or that while we're waiting for the resurrection of the dead, we're not really conscious because we don't have flesh and bones. Because in order to be a person, you must have flesh and bones, and we see that's not true just from this little glimpse right here. Okay, so that's just a little side note there for a second. Hopefully that is understandable for everybody. But you see that he eats, and we see later on with Thomas that you can touch him. And so whatever the glorified body is, I don't know if the glorified body has blood or not. It's a good question. Because the blood was not pouring out of Jesus, and we'll see it in John 20 here in a second when he said to Thomas, put your hand in my side. And blood wasn't pouring out continually while he was standing there. So somehow, I don't know if this will be true of all of us, but the Bible, let's say, will be like him. Okay? And so whether we'll have blood or not, I have no idea. But we'll still have a flesh and bones body. I do know that. And we'll still be able to eat. Okay, and that's some of the things he uses to prove to them that he actually is not a spirit, but he has flesh and bones.
Can you go back just for a moment back to the actual
Mm-hmm.
You said, and I agree that the point that God is spirit, and worship in spirit and truth, and Jesus is God.
Mm-hmm. God the Son.
God the Son.
John 4, which is where we're quoting from, is talking about God the Father.
Yes.
Spirit and in truth. He is spirit, must worship in spirit and truth. Yep. Yeah, so I'm just saying that because there's some people who we listened to before, like Tim Warner, he's starting to question those things. And one of the arguments he uses is that soul actually means the whole person. It means their body too, and that after the grave, when you die, the spirit it goes back to God, and we're no longer conscious until we're risen from the dead again. So I'm just use that as a sidetrack in case any of you have listened to some of his teachings about this, where he's starting to question these. I know you have, brother. Does it sound like I'm representing his position accurately?
Yeah, it sounds
Okay.
fairly complete. He believes that the soul is the your experiences, everything that you are, but it's combined with your body, so that your soul cannot exist without the body, and that's his position.
Yeah.
That whenever your body dies, that your soul is actually attached to the remains of your body, whether it gets scattered into ashes, whether it changes state. I mean, your body still exists in some form, whether
Sure.
it's ash or decomposed or turns back into dirt.
Right.
But he says that dirt or that ash or whatever it is in that body, your soul is still connected to that.
Hanging out there.
Yeah.
He
The
says that,
spirit's going to heaven.
right, he says that the grave is where you go. You don't go to hell, you don't go to paradise, you go to the grave.
No, the spirit has not gone to heaven. The spirit goes back to God.
That's
Yeah.
what he says.
Yeah, so we won't get too much into this. I didn't want to get too much into it. Just a little exit ramp just for a second here in case any of you were listening to it. I guess it was mostly for Brother Tracy. I know he's been listening to it. But we'll probably talk about it a different time later on down the road. So we see that these things, he proves these things that he can eat. And then in verse 44 he says, Then he said to them, These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you. That all these things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me. And then he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the Scriptures. Then he said to them, Thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. Okay, so we see he opens their understanding. They begin to finally to understand these things. Now, who does he appear to here? Let's go to John 20. And let's see who's included and who he appears to here. Now, there in in Luke, it says the 11, okay? And, let's see here. Yeah, in verse 33 it says the 11, and those who are gathered together. Now, I don't know if he's including Thomas and 11 or not, but John 20 says, Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. Okay, so when Jesus appeared to them that night, after the Emmaus disciples came back and talked to them, everyone's now back there now. When Jesus appeared to them then, Thomas was not one of them. So I don't know if Luke is including maybe Matthias at that point in time. Because remember, when Luke is written, it's written after Matthias has already been chosen in the book of Acts. So maybe that's why he said 11, or maybe he's saying 11, he's trying to include Thomas, but Thomas wasn't actually there. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples therefore said to him, We have seen the Lord. So he said to them, Unless I see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days, the disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. And Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, My Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And so we see the order of the appearance of Jesus to different people. We see that he first appeared to Mary Magdalene. Then he appeared to the other women who were on their way back from the tomb. Then he appeared to the disciples on the way to Emmaus. Then he appeared to Peter. Then he appeared to all of them except for Thomas, who was not there. And then he appeared to all of them with Thomas there. Okay? And we're going to look at other appearances next time I teach next week, but that's the appearance we're going to end on this week. There's other appearances that 1 Corinthians 15 talks about, like a 500 and so on and so forth. But that's the appearance we're going to end on here, and we'll finish up Matthew hopefully next week. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't. And then after that, the 2 weeks after that, we're going to, just like we did last time, we're halfway through Matthew. At Matthew 14, we did a review of the first 7 and then the second 7. The 2 weeks after that, we'll review the third 7 and the fourth 7. So we can kind of get this in your mind. I might even make up a test to see how well you remember the things you learned in Matthew. And some of you are at a disadvantage because you weren't here at the beginning, but those who are at the beginning, we'll see how well you listened and how well you retained everything. Whether I do a test or not, we'll be doing a review. Okay, so let's open. I know there may be some questions about things. I've been studying this probably about 3 weeks now regarding the chronology here. It was difficult, and I really couldn't find. I looked at commentaries, so I couldn't really find one that I completely agreed with on these things. But based upon the facts and the scripture we looked at, this is what I've come forth with, and I think it's probably the most accurate thing I can come up with. Okay, questions, objections, or things you want to add?
Just for the test, if you were to do the test, it would be after your final review.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would be like a written test or a verbal test or both, or.
Oh, it'd be written. That's what I mean by test.
And,
Yeah.
I
It won't be open book.
no, I didn't
Okay.
say the open book.
Yeah.
We tried that yesterday. We're not
I'm just letting you know. I'm not saying you said it
Right,
was.
I don't really think it's fair to the people who just got here, and they should participate too. At least in the last few, the parts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Obviously, there's grace involved there. Those who-
We can grade them on a curve.
It might be multiple choice, might be fill in the blank, might be true false, might be like long answer essay. No, I'm just joking. No essay. I might say, give me a chronology of who Jesus appeared to. You know.
Any prizes offered?
Huh?
Any prizes offered?
We'll see. I have plenty of time to think about that. So, I may have next week to finish up Matthew, and then Brother Kevin will teach, and I'll teach 2 more weeks, and then I'll be able to give the test after that. So, it's about a month from now, so I have plenty of time to think about those details. But, yeah, I mean, this is important to, we don't want this to be like the public school education system where you memorize a bunch of facts, and as soon as you don't test, well, you forgot them, Stuff that you want to remember. This is the kind of stuff you want to keep in there for good, So when your Bibles get taken away, if they do, you still have it up there, You still have it up there. So, all right, Brother Tracy.
I guess that one thing back in Luke 24,
Uh-huh.
in verse 10, which says it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna
Mhm.
and Mary, the mother of James, and other women that were with them. Where it says women that were with them,
Mhm.
that's actually not in the text, right?
Well, women's not in the text, but other with them.
Oh, that's in the text.
Other with them. So woman is
We
not
can
there.
infer it was women
Right.
because, all
Salome
the
was with them. We know Salome was with them. That's not mentioned there, so we
Right.
know she was a woman. So
Right.
that's probably why they put that in
So
there.
it wouldn't necessarily mean other women that weren't listed in all the accounts. It could just mean the ones that wasn't listed in this account.
There's only one that wasn't listed in this account. That's Salome.
Right.
And so I think it's in the plural there in the Greek. So it has to be more than just Salome, I think.
The other is in plural.
Yes. Yes.
The women's not there.
No, other them. Other with them. Yeah. So I think that's why they put women there, because
Right.
the rest of it's in the plural. But it's at least Salome and one other person, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that.
Yep.
How would you see the complexity of this between the 4 Gospels? How do we deal with skeptics in the open air and try to answer this simply and directly so that everybody can...
Well, I don't think it is
If
simple.
they're truly seeking...
I don't think it is simple. Part of the problem with skeptics is that they're looking for problems with the Bible. If you come to the Bible with the proper mindset that it is the Word of God, you're not going to try to find problems with it. You're going to try to find ways to make it fit the way it's supposed to. And so that's the problem. They're biased. And so you're not going to find, even this explanation I've given, skeptics probably won't accept it. But who cares? I know that the Bible is infallible and there's no problems with it. There's no errors, no contradictions in it. So it's not going to be simple to deal with. And they may think they have one over on you by pointing out differences between them. But we know they don't. And so, but their main problem is not, as we know with any skeptic, their main problem is not a intellectual problem. It's a moral problem. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They want to be sinners. That's the main problem. So if someone were to try to bring this up to me, I might try to explain it to them, depending on how their demeanor is and the way they're acting. If they're just a mocker, listen, I don't have to convince you of anything. And then it go right to the moral law, go right back to their sin, and go back to the cross, which is really the real issue with them. But if they're open to it, if they really want to sit down and listen to me and explain to them, they should be willing to accept it, because it is an explanation that fits with everything that's found here. So, Joe, you showing off, your hand up, Sean? Oh, I thought you did.
I was thinking of a question, but I can't find it.
Okay.
I think I have a question. So it seems like they bought spices the night before,
Mm-hmm.
basically right after the Sabbath, so 6 p.m. right after 6 p.m. sometime in there in the evening they bought,
Right.
and the next morning would have been when they went.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
What's that?
I couldn't can't buy spices, I can't buy and sell on Sabbath.
It's after Sabbath.
After Sabbath.
6 p.m.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I was saying, they bought
After
them
Sabbath
this
ends.
morning they went instead of 8.
All the shops open right back up.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure 6 p.m. wasn't considered morning to them somehow.
No, no, it was not considered morning. And not only that, we see it says early in the morning that it began to dawn.
Yeah.
6 p.m. is not dawning; it's
Just
dusking.
wanna make sure, yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, one thing skeptics may say, or some might say that one objection I thought of anyway is that people would say, well, the early church, they wouldn't have had all 4 gospels at once. Well, that may be true. If some locations may not have had all 4 at once, but the good news about them is they had the actual apostles there to give more details, to give more explanation and elaboration on these things. Whereas we don't have that, which is one of the reasons we need all 4 accounts to be able to get the full context of what happened there. So, yes.
The part, I can't remember exactly which kind
Mhm.
of get lost in the
Yep.
details here. Where Jesus says, "Do not cling to me, for I'm not yet ascended to the Father."
That's in John.
Yeah, I don't believe he's actually talking about physical touching there. I think he's just talking about don't get used to me being around.
Mhm.
Because in the other account, they actually all did touch him. Because there are some false doctrines people can pull from that. I've heard people say that because women are unclean, they couldn't touch Jesus. And
Mhm.
that's a really horrible thing to say. But I have heard people say that before because of that one little passage. And I just wanted to bring that out. I think he's talking about don't get used to me being around as far as don't cling to me. Like you hear people say all the time, well, that person's really kind of clingy. That person's really kind of a catchy, type of person.
Mhm.
So I believe that's what he's talking about there because they all touched him. The women touched his feet. I mean, he was touched. He said, "Handle me."
Mhm.
All these other times he said, "Touch me." I don't think he's talking about physical touching there. So.
Or maybe she did touch him. He's just don't hold on to me. You have to let go of me. So
Right.
I have to go to my father, and I have to
Right.
come back, and you have to go back and tell them. So either way, I mean, they can try to make even if it is talking about physical touch, they can try to make a false doctrine, but it doesn't. She touched him.
Right.
I mean, if she touched him, she touched him. So that can't be. You can't get a false doctrine of that. I mean, there's
Right.
people will try to make it like the Gnostics will try to make it a false doctrine,
I've
but
heard some really bad things come out of that. So.
yeah. Yep.
I'm wondering how the Gnostics got by Luke 24, 38.
Or John 20, where he has the nail prints on the side, at his hands and his feet, and
I get by that one. I'm just talking about where he ate in front of them. Did John 20 talk about him eating in front of
yeah,
them?
John 20, yeah.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, they must not have had those gospels or just discounted them or cut them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Twisting and erasing. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Yes, the Bible does say that the life is in the blood, but even if our glorified bodies doesn't have any blood, we're going to have life regardless. So,
Yeah.
It doesn't really say whether or not we're going to have blood. It wouldn't make sense that Jesus would be walking around with blood gushing out of his side everywhere. It wouldn't
Right.
make any sense.
Well, he could be healed, his wounds could be healed, doesn't mean just because blood's not coming out of his wounds, doesn't mean that he doesn't have blood. I mean, you could make that assumption, but
Well, the hole would still be there in order to stick your hand inside the wound. The hole
people
would
have
be-
wounds that have holes in their bodies that have been healed, and you still stick your finger or hand in a cavity, it's still there. So that still, but they still have blood, and so I don't know if I believe that, but I do believe that obviously he's not bleeding all over the place, so he will be healed if he has blood, and in his body, we have blood in our inside. We have tears, so in the kingdom we'll shed tears for a while, and we'll dry those tears, so we still have physical tears. So, I don't know.
I'd say it's probably possible that we could have blood because the Bible does say the life is in the blood, so it makes sense that we would still have it. But our blood would never be shed ever again, so we wouldn't ever see it. So whether we have it or not is going to be kind of irrelevant because we're not going to see it anyway.